wake me up to another good morning, time to go.
Are you ready to explore God's wild and wonderful world? Welcome to the Nat Theo podcast. I'm your host, Erin Lynham. I'm a certified master naturalist, Bible teacher, and author, and I am so excited to dive into God's written word, the Bible, and his created world with you. Have you ever stolen anything? When I was about 5 years old, I stole a box of animal crackers from a store. When my mom found out in the parking lot, she helped me go back into the store, return the stolen animal crackers, and apologize to the store workers. We should never take what does not belong to us. However, today we will hear a story from a man who stole something very special. And in fact, I don't think anyone would be upset that he took it. It actually changed his life. I thought it would be fun, as this month we are looking at how God wonderfully made our bodies, to hear from a doctor who understands those designs very well. Today, we will hear Dr. Matthew Sleeth's story, which I know will inspire you as it has me. We'll also learn how his entire life changed when he stole a Bible from the hospital he worked at. This is a bonus episode, and so the flow will be a little different from our regular lessons. Today, we will simply enjoy Dr. Matthew Sleeth's story, and tomorrow we will return to our normal lesson format as he shares with us how amazing the human heart is. Dr. Matthew Sleeth used to work as a doctor in emergency rooms. Can you imagine that job? He must have seen some pretty amazing things. He resigned from his work at the emergency room to pursue teaching and preaching and writing about faith and health. Matthew is the director of an amazing organization called Blessed Earth, which inspires biblically based stewardship of God's creation. That means that he and his wife, Nancy, and their team help others understand and take care of God's creation. I discovered Dr. Matthew Sleeth's work through his incredible book about trees titled Reforesting Faith. For all the adults listening, I highly recommend this book. It is like a nature walk through the Bible, diving into trees all throughout Scripture. Dr. Sleeth also wrote another book that deeply impacted me called 24/6, which is all about Sabbath. It greatly inspired my upcoming book on Sabbath that releases in May. In fact, Dr. Sleeth served as an endorser for 2 of my books, including my newest. Okay, let's meet Dr. Matthew Sleeth. Dr. Sleeth, thank you so much for joining us. I am very excited to hear your story and learn from you tomorrow on the episode that we'll be doing about the human heart. Thank you so much for joining us on Nat Theo.
My pleasure to be with you and everyone listening.
Well, Dr. Sleeth, you were a doctor who believed only in science, and I loved reading your story in your book, because something changed along the way, and you wrote that science had failed you in a way. Can you share that story?
Sure. I was married, and I had 2 children, and I was working as an emergency room doctor, and a number of things began to unfold in our lives, and some very bad things. My wife's brother drowned in front of my children. And in front of my wife. And just a number of bad things happened. I took care of some patients, and one of them was very ill mentally. And then some bad things happened in society. 9/11 happened, which most people, even if they weren't alive at that time, have heard about. And what I woke up to was the fact that there was evil in the world, and that this evil was a force that science didn't really acknowledge or know how to deal with. And of course, evil is tied to sin. And sin is a concept, again, that science doesn't even acknowledge that exists. And so, realizing that all these bad things were happening around me and in the world, and realizing that there was evil. And at that time, I didn't know that evil was sin, um, but I knew that evil was evil. And I wanted to know, well, if there's evil out there, where does the good come from? And certainly doing medicine, there is good, and I would define it as good. And the way I typically think about this is a scenario of, let's say we have a child that's been out on a bicycle and they've been hit by a car, and they're brought into the emergency room, and I'm running the team that's trying to save them, and we may not even know the name of the child. And I would look around, and there might be a dozen or more people just pouring all of their skill and their energy into making that child well. And I believe that that is fundamentally good. I believed it was good then, and now I know it's good as a Christian. And so, where does that good come from? And I went to try to find out, because goodness, just like evil, is a concept that science can't really acknowledge or understand. I read through a number of the world's sacred texts. Those are books that many people in the world feel are very, very important. And I read through quite a number of those, probably five of the big sacred texts and many other books. And I was looking for, where does this source of goodness comes from, and also how do we handle evil? What do we do about that? And then and I found, many things that were good in some of those books, but I really didn't find the answer I was looking for. Then I was in the hospital one morning. I love to read, and I didn't have a patient
So I just want to clarify, you're in the hospital, you're doing your work,
I'm doing my
correct, as a
work. Yes,
doctor.
I,
Okay,
I was
okay.
not in the hospital as a patient. I was in the hospital doing my work. I should clarify that. And I needed something to read because I didn't have a patient at that moment to take care of. And I went looking, and on a waiting room table, I came across an orange book that said Holy Bible on the side. And I picked it up, and I thought, I've never read this. I don't know what's inside this. And we didn't have one in our house. And I wanted to read it, and I stole it. I didn't realize that
You stole the Bible.
yeah, I didn't realize that you're allowed to take them. You're supposed to take them even. And I took it and I started reading in the book of Matthew, and that's my name that I've been called. And so I think it was a natural place to start, and it was a very good place to start in the Bible.
Mhm.
And I met Jesus Christ, and that has changed everything in my life. And the very good news is that it not only changed everything in my life, but it changed everything in my wife's life and my sons and my daughters. And uh, it explained where evil came from. It explained where the goodness on this planet comes from. And I became a follower of Christ and have never stopped, and just thrill every day to learn more about Christ and to be part of his work, because Christ is involved in good work all the time.
Absolutely. Wow, what a beautiful story. I just love that. And I love that it was that you sensed, from what I'm hearing, you sensed that there was this inherent. So that word inherent kind of being like something that is tucked inside of us, that is natural inside of us, this inherent knowledge of good and evil. And that comes right out of scripture. And you're right that like science doesn't have a description for that. But we know that God created everything that is visible and invisible. I love that. Thank you. So you wrote that choosing to follow Jesus changed every area of your life. How did it change how you relate to your patients in the hospital and serve as a doctor?
It's interesting that as a physician, particularly in the emergency department, a great deal of what you are taking care of are things um, that are not just accidents, but things that, if you will, are under our control. People who drink too much alcohol, people who eat too much, people who do reckless things. So much of a doctor's job is taking care of the results of things that are completely preventable if the
Mhm.
person made better choices. And as a physician, you don't really pay too much attention to all that. You just do the work of medicine, of taking care of the pathology of the body. That means the things that are wrong or broken, without worrying about why they're wrong or broken. And I've asked a number of physicians recently, other doctors, well, what percentage of what you're taking care of could be prevented simply by somebody making better choices, choosing not to smoke, for instance?
Mhm.
And most of the doctors will say somewhere between 70 and 90% of their work um,
Oh, wow.
it is around those areas. Um, and so the first thing was to realize there's something else going on with humans other than just the mechanisms of our bodies failing. Um, and then to recognize that in medicine, we are taught to deal with the body and the mind, but that from a Christian worldview, we also have a soul and a spirit. And then the other thing, I think it was something I felt, but I was able to put words around it from Scripture, is that life is a sacred, sacred thing. Life is a gift and to be treasured and to be thankful for. And I'm not really sure that I had the words around that, although I always treated life as sacred, and I'm glad for that. I was never involved in not treating life as sacred.
That's so interesting because again, like it was inherent, like you knew inside of you that life was special, human life was special. And then when you started following Jesus, just to have this fuller understanding of why, because we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and for all of that to just make sense. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like when you began reading the Bible and following Jesus, I love that all it seems like it completed your picture because I know a lot of people have a hard time thinking about science and God together. And it seems like your story was this beautiful, just it was completing the picture. So it makes me think about one day, one of my sons was in our neighborhood and he was playing with some buddies. And one of his friends told him, he said, I don't believe in God because I believe in science. Do you have some advice that you can share with our listeners if they hear an idea like this or someone say that science and God cannot go together?
Well, I believe that God invented science. He spoke the world into existence. I believe that not only did God make us, but he made us, meaning you, me, your listeners, human beings in his image. There's something very different about you and me than any other creature on this planet. We are capable of miraculously wonderful things and terrible things as well. We are not just another one of the creatures roaming this planet, and and I believe God invented science, and I don't believe there's any disconnect. One of my favorite places in the Bible is in a book called Job, and it's an interesting scene because God shows up at in person, if you will, and speaks directly to the listeners. And that is not done too much in Scripture. And God lays out all these things of how the stars move and the oceans and how animals interact with each other. He's saying, I made all this and I want you to figure it out and explore it. I made it. I made you in my image. Let's work together to understand this. And you think of all the millions of people in the world trying to understand science. What we're really trying to do is understand an aspect of God. And the book of Romans, which is a book that Paul the Apostle wrote, um, in the first chapter, he talks about this, that if we just go out and take a look at nature, we are without excuse for knowing that there is a God, because there's just no way in the world that all this could just randomly happen.
I love that you bring up those passages. Those are a couple of my favorites. And it's so true that this whole pursuit of science, that is such an old pursuit. And you're right, so many people trying to understand this world around us and our place in it. And it is all a pursuit of God. It all goes back to that curiosity that He has tucked inside of us. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I know it will encourage our listeners and strengthen their faith, just as it has my own. And we are very excited to hear from you tomorrow about God's design of the human heart. Thank you for being here.
I'm looking forward to it.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed Dr. Sleeth's story. I always love hearing stories about those who choose to follow God and then use their knowledge of creation to help others understand who God is. Dr. Sleeth will be doing just that tomorrow. So be sure to tune in first thing to learn about the amazing heart beating inside of you. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of Nat Theo. Tune in tomorrow as Dr. Matthew Sleeth teaches us how God wonderfully made our hearts. Make sure to check out Dr. Matthew Sleeth's books and his organization, Blessed Earth, which you can find at the links in our show notes. Until next time, keep exploring God's wild and wonderful world.